We're glad you could be here with us tonight. I'm Laurel Takama. I'm the manager of the Courthouse Public Library here in Arlington. Welcome to our final Arlington Reads event, celebrating the life and work of acclaimed author, poet, screenwriter, and civil rights activist, James Baldwin. Baldwin's work had a profound impact on contemporary American identity, as his contributions challenged America on its promises of equality and justice. In numerous essays, novels, plays, and public speeches, Baldwin's eloquent voice echoed the pain and struggle of Black Americans, portraying the saving power of brotherhood while addressing race, politics, and sexuality to create distinct narratives alongside the civil rights movement. We would like to thank the Friends of the Arlington Public Library, who sponsor all Arlington Reads programs and all programming here at the library. We also would like to thank One More Page for being our booksellers this evening. Tonight's conversation will be led by Julie Waite, our Youth Services Librarian at Courthouse Public Library. And now, to introduce the author for this evening. George M. Johnson is an award-winning Black non-binary writer, author, and executive producer located in the LA area. They are the author of the New York Times best-selling young adult memoir, All Boys Aren't Blue, discussing their adolescence growing up as a young Black queer boy in New Jersey through a series of powerful essays. The book was optioned for television by Gabrielle Union. As a former journalist, George has written for major outlets, including Teen Vogue, Entertainment Tonight, NBC, and BuzzFeed. In 2019, they were awarded the Salute to Excellence Award by the National Association of Black Journalists for their article, When Racism Anchors Your Health, published in Vice magazine. George was listed on the Route 100 Most Influential African Americans in 2020, the Out 100 Most Influential LGBTQ People in 2021, and was honored as one of the Time 100 Next Most Influential People in the World in 2022. Their second, yeah. Their second memoir, We Are Not Broken, was released in September of 2021. It received the Carter G. Woodson Award, which recognizes books that accurately and sensitively depict the experience of one or more historically marginalized racial/ethnic groups in the United States. The book also received the Young Adult Nonfiction Honor from the International Literacy Association. In 2021, they wrote and executive produced the dramatic reading of All Boys Aren't Blue, starring Jennifer Lewis and Delon Burnside, which received a 2022 special recognition from GLAAD. George is also a proud HBCU alum twice over and a member of the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Their upcoming book, Flamboyance, The Queer Harlem Renaissance I Wish I'd Known, is an empowering set of essays about Black and queer icons from the Harlem Renaissance and will be released this September. Please welcome George M. Johnson.
Hi. Thank you so much for being here. I am super excited for this evening, not only as part of Arlington Public Libraries, but also as someone who is such a fan of your work. So thank you so much for being here. And I'm so honored to have this conversation and to wrap up our Arlington Reads James Baldwin Centennial. So I know that you have mentioned that James Baldwin is one of your legacy figures. Recognizing him as not only a forefront of Black writing, Black queer writing, but also as an American writer. So can you tell me more about how their work has inspired you, not only as an author, but also as an activist?
Yeah, I think, one, it's interesting because last night I was at the Native Son Awards in New York City, which is an organization that was created in honor of James Baldwin's Notes of a Native Son by Emil Wilbekin. I see Alpha out there. By Emil Wilbekin, who is an amazing editor and journalist in his own right, who was also inspired by James Baldwin. And so I think when I think about Baldwin, I just think about how like the legacy of Black queer writing has just continued, and how like we just become extensions of like some of the work that he put out into the world. Even in doing the book on the Harlem Renaissance, you know, learning that Countee Cullen, who was one of our great Black queer poets from the 1920s, was James Baldwin's 10th grade English teacher. So it all just kind of works itself back, right? And so it's like, you know, there is no All Boys Aren't Blue without a Notes of a Native Son, and then there is no Notes of a Native Son without Countee Cullen, you know, being a part of the New Negro in 1925, right? And so it's like, now I'm putting a book out almost 100 years after the New Negro was created about the Harlem Renaissance. So it just all like works itself back in a circle, and I guess, you know, maybe 15, 20, 30 years from now, there'll be some other Black queer kid up here talking about All Boys Aren't Blue and how I came to their creative writing class and it inspired them to write a book, right?
Yeah.
So I just think it all kind of like talks to each other. And so that's what I really think about when I think about Baldwin. And I just think about how relevant his words and his actions are still today. He was nuanced, he was complicated, he was right a lot of times, but he was wrong a lot of times. And so I think like watching him go back and forth with Nikki Giovanni is always one of my favorite things to watch, because it challenged him and it pushed him. But he, as brilliant as he was, he also knew that he wasn't perfect. And I think that is something that most of us carry with us as writers, knowing that we're not perfect. Zora Neale Hurston talks about it a lot too. Like, if we, like, she often said with writers, like, she wished we knew everything. Like, I wish I knew everything when I was writing the book, but then if I knew everything, maybe I wouldn't write the book. So at some point, you have to stop, write the book, and then when you realize whatever your wrongs were in that book, that's what makes you keep going to write the next one.
Absolutely.
And I think with Baldwin, you watched a lot of evolution and growth as he continued to learn and grow, and I think that's what inspires me the most to continue to do what I do.
I agree. I know a lot of like artists have said that, would you go back and change your work? And they're like, no, it was authentic for what I was feeling at that time, and that means a lot as well. So I really understand that process of it, and it's cool to see your growth as well as you continue. Is there anything that you, like any messages or themes that you include or are inspired by James Baldwin in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think like James's work always came from a historical lens, right? Like he didn't just process the world as like some new phenomenon of today. He was always able to tie in like the past to explain the present. And so I think deeply rooted in my work is always going back to be like, well, this, like what happens today is because of something that happened 280 years ago when this law was made, and then this thing happened, and then this reform happened, and then this happened, and this happened, and now we're here today. And so I think when I think about his work in particular, like the fact that you could still pull quotes, and the fact that people literally quote him every day still for the current state of life. Yeah. These quotes were made while he was alive, but these quotes still speak to where we are today in many ways, right? And everybody can't do that, right? And so I think about the timelessness of his work, but that timelessness comes from the fact that he was very well researched and he understood the history. And, you know, they always say the more things change, the more they stay the same. And so you kind of have to look at the world in cycles. And so people like him, people like Toni Morrison, people like Angela Davis, they weren't giving words for just the day. They were giving words that were timeless, that could be applied when this situation comes up again, because they were smart enough to know it may have looked different in the past, but these two situations are the exact same.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I'm glad that you actually brought that up, because one of my favorite parts in All Boys Aren't Blue was when you talked about history. And being in a history class, and you pointed out that there is a lot of American figures that are celebrated that maybe do not live up to such praise. And then even when talking about Black history, that the focus of it is told through the lens of slavery. Right. And so while like reading that and then knowing about your influence of James Baldwin, I was like, you know, because it's this moment where you're a kid, I want to be like, oh my gosh, there are people like this. So what was it like for you when you did discover James Baldwin, not only as like a Black queer writer, but also as an activist, like to have that representation?
Yeah, it's interesting because, well, one, I always talk about the fact that, like, we learned about James Baldwin when I was younger. But I didn't know he was queer, right? Like, they always left that part out. So when they teach you about people like when Black History Month comes around and they pick all these figures for you to read and learn about, they always leave out the part that a lot of them were queer, right? So it's like, I knew who Josephine Baker was, and I knew who Ethel Waters was, and I knew who James Baldwin was. I knew who these people were, but I didn't know who they actually were. And then you get older and you actually learn who they actually were, and you realize that the lens through which they saw the world looked different. And so what once, I don't want to say what once was profound, but like it explains why they were so profound, right? And it's like their profoundness came from the fact that they didn't only have one lens to look through the world, and that they were looking through the world through two lenses that were rejected, Blackness and queerness. And so to sit at the intersection of oppressions, they had to look at everything a lot differently than a person who was Black and heterosexual during the same times in the 60s and 70s as Baldwin, right? And so the activism had to look different because I couldn't just fight for one piece of me or this part of my identity. I had to fight for both parts of my identity and fight the overlapping and the intersecting. And so that meant that my activism looked different than other activists. And I think that's part of where I'm at today. As a writer, as an activist, my activism looks different. And sometimes people can't figure it out. And I'm like, well, that's because the lens through which I have to live through is different than yours. And so because of that, when I am thinking about who is the most marginalized and like how we do this work, sometimes it starts with people who have even more marginalizations than myself. But when I think about other activists who are heterosexual, they don't think about the people who are more oppressed than them. They just think about the people who are in the oppressed group with them with the same matching markers. Yeah. And we don't have that luxury. I have to think about, because because we all should, but I think about non-binary people. I think about trans people. I think about gender non-conforming people. I think about people with disabilities. I think about so many other people because my lens looks different, and that lens has to look different because if not, then I could be fighting for, I guess, one part of myself while also denying another part of myself. As we see with so many people when they vote against their own rights, in a sense, when they vote against their own protections, you know, and you kind of feel baffled, but it's because they vote or their activism is built in a way that only protects one part of their identity. And it usually protects the part of their identity that they know is going to be the safest and that they'll still survive with. I don't have that luxury. I can't just fight for one part of my identity and think that my survival will be still intact. And so that's when I think about how Baldwin's activism was. It was always coming from that lens, right? And like even like how he discussed America, he was like, this is my country too, it's a beautiful country, so I have every right to criticize it. You know what I'm saying? And so I kind of think from that same lens. It's like, this is my country too, and I have every right to criticize it, even if it's not to your liking. And that's really what, I guess that's what my activism is. Like, I went to college in Richmond, and so it was always just so interesting seeing how these monuments were just like revered, like for the people who lost. I always just thought that was so strange. Like, I was like, it's the only country where you make monuments to the people who lost the war. Like, I've never, like, you know, and it's like, yeah, and I mean the fact that there are still Black kids going to schools named after slave owners. Like, Virginia's a very interesting, complicated, nuanced state. And so I think also a lot of my work is shaped in the fact that I had to live in a place that was like I grew up in Jersey. That's not how that works up in Jersey. But here, somehow that's normal, and everybody writes it off as like, well, that's just history, right? And it's like, that's how we preserve history. And it's like, well, are you preserving history? Or are you holding on to the hopes that what these people believe will one day become true? And if we keep them here and look at them as false idols, in a sense, you know, maybe this dream will come true. So and that's, I guess, how my activism is shaped, like having to look at all sides of the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of you, in the book, I think what was the most interesting was when you did go to college in Virginia, and which is definitely different than Jersey, absolutely. I went to New York for the first time the other weekend, and it's a full different vibe. But I remember reading that and your decision to rush for a fraternity, and you ended up joining Alpha Phi Alpha. So shout out to that. But I remember, like, as a reader for that. And you were like, I'm going to join a fraternity to continue to preserve this masculine image. And I was like, as a reader, I was like, oh God, that's a bad idea. Like, what are you doing? That is not the space. What advice would you give for anyone who is looking to join a fraternity? Because that is where you found your brotherhood. That's where you first began to embrace your identity. And, well, when you, came out with your queerness for the first time. And, like, it was just, as a reader, and I know, like, when I've talked to some of my friends about their book, they were like, I can't believe that was the community. So what would you give anyone advice in navigating a fraternity or joining those types of organizations? And then how do you navigate fears of being in a space that are perceived as unsafe for queer identifying people?
That's a good question. One, like, fraternities are a lot different now. Sororities are a lot different now. I do feel fraternities are moving a lot slower when it comes to the acceptance of LGBTQ people than sororities have been moving. They're always at the forefront. That's how I always feel. Like, they are, like, the sororities are always ahead of us when it comes to issues in social, especially nowadays in social change. Part of the issue with the fraternities, and I say this all the time, is their lens of seeing it is like, how do we make the fraternity more accepting, right? How do we make it more accepting of queer people and gay people and possibly trans people? And I'm always telling them, like, well, you don't really have to, it's not about making it more accepting as much as it's about acknowledging that it already exists within it. Yeah. And there's still like in their minds, like, oh, well, it only exists within because y'all snuck through. And it's like, nobody snuck in. Like, I didn't sneak in. Like, I was gay as a blade, like my grandmother would say. So it's like, I didn't sneak in. Like, we said we weren't, but they knew we were. Like, you know what I mean? So it was like, nobody snuck in. And there are trans people in my organization, and some of them are not publicly trans, but have contacted me privately to tell me, like, I'm trans and I'm in the org, right? And so when the org does talk to me about certain things, I'm telling them that, like, you have to acknowledge what's already here. Like, you don't have to change anything when it comes to the process or bringing people in because they're already in, right? And so it's like almost like when I think about like diversity, equity, and inclusion, sometimes with the inclusion piece, I'm always like, well, we're already in. So what does the inclusion mean? Like, I don't need to be included in something I'm already in. I work in the building. Yep. I work at my desk. I work with you people. I'm already included, right? So it's about acknowledging my differences, right? Maybe it should be called diversity, equity, and acknowledgement. But yeah, so when it comes to the fraternity, that's my first thing. I think the second thing is you have to make the fraternity like I don't want to say like work for you, but in a sense, it's like I now understand like the things that I was looking for I actually got the things I needed. Yeah. You know, like that I didn't know that I needed. Like I was chasing this one thing and ran smack into the actual thing that I needed, which was a community of a bunch of queer men who existed within the fraternity, right? And they ended up becoming like my shepherds of getting me through society and getting me through queerness, and then also my blackness, right? And so I think for anybody who is still like joining the fraternity, you have to know some people just have very outdated mindsets when it comes to queerness, who are unfortunately heads of the org or heads of the chapters and everything. Everybody's not like that though. And I think the organizations have done a much better job of leadership looking like a variety of identities. Whereas when I crossed in 2006 in Virginia, it just did not look like that. And I also think because now social media is out there, it is what it is. Like, and trust me, we have all kind of issues still, because every now and then, you know, an alpha will graduate and put on some heels, and it pisses a bunch of brothers off. And I'm always just like, okay, like, do we want to start calling out everybody else's sins? Or, because I'm happy to do it, because, you know.
Probably have photos too.
And I have done it. I've had to do it. And it's like, listen, chivalry is in our bylaws. And I know what a lot of y'all do at homecoming. So when y'all are traveling without your spouses. So let's, you know, like let's not go that far. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's like, people gotta, like, you know, I think but when you put it in that type of context, or you put it in that type of lens, people then are like, oh yeah, it's kind of like I'm cherry picking, like, well, queerness breaks our image, when it's like, but you don't feel that way about these things that you know also are not in the best image or likeness of, you know, manly deeds and scholarship. And then, like, it's manly deeds, scholarship, and love for all mankind. That's our actual motto and our aims. And it's like, but that love for all mankind gets so lost. And so I think it's not even about people joining the fraternity as much as it's about people who run the fraternity who need to be checked.
Yeah, I agree. Awesome. And I also want to talk about a little bit more about All Boys Aren't Blue. Says when I talk about the book, when I am telling the book to people that they have to read this story, one of the main, like the first thing I talk about is your family. And the love and connection. When you guys read this book, you can just feel like the love, the rareness of the connection, not only in like your love for each other, but also in your family's response to queerness, which, I mean, like you said, like in the early 2000s, 90s, the 80s, like I was truly shocked reading this book and feeling your family's love and acceptance. So my question is, what advice would you give to families who are navigating a similar journey, maybe with a queer relative, and what would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, like, I've been carrying lately. That's why I'm like, do I want to curse? No, I'm not going to curse. But it's like, for real though, it's like, I guess we in like 2024, it's like enough is enough. Like, queer kids exist. Like, at some point, it's like, I want to have grace for families who still say they don't understand, but it's like, we are past the point of understanding. I don't know. Like, I feel like queer representation's at an all-time high. I feel like there are so many resources that weren't here 20 years ago. I feel like, you know, it's like you gotta work on, for these particular families who are struggling, it's like, that's a struggle that's between you and probably your religion. That's actually not a struggle between you and your child, though. And you making it some type of form of retribution in some spiritual manifestation of like, because maybe you, and I think a lot of them process like, I did something and now I have to deal with a child that is queer or something. Like, it's almost like some type of retribution because maybe you didn't hate queer people enough, or maybe you didn't trust in the word enough. And now God has like placed a child in your life that you have to hate or something. It's very weird. I've seen it, right? Like weird, like divine retribution, I think is what people will call it. And, you know, at the end of the day, most of what happens is called theological violence. And it is that like irrational attempt to try and like harm queer children because of like irrational religious beliefs. Yeah. And that's really what most of it comes from. Yeah, like when you get down to it, like, and it's funny too, because a lot of the people who, let's say they have issues with their queer kids or whatever, like, they don't even go to church, but they lean on the Bible. Like, it's a very strange, you know, it's like they haven't been to church in years, or, you know,
but suddenly
they're Easter goers. You know, because it's a bunch of people that only go on Easter, sunrise service, and they feel like that's enough for the year. or they watch night goers, which is New Year's Eve, and they go right before they go to the club. But they have so many thoughts and so many beliefs around sinning and queerness and abomination and all of those things. And so for me, a lot of it does boil down to like, do y'all actually have issues with your kid, or do you have issues with yourself? Like, I think people have went through life for so long not actually having to interrogate their own identity that it scares them when a person is so proud in theirs. Yeah. And I liken it to even when I like started getting tattoos like on my hands. I remember part of my identity was so wrapped in respectability politics that I believed that the only way I could be successful is if all of my tattoos were below my wrist, below my neck, and then no visible spots if I ever had to wear a suit and tie. And it was like, you then get into the workforce, you get into the real world, and you start doing things, and you're like, well, who made that up? Like, who was the first person that said that and then made everybody else run along with it? And then how did that then become a part of all of our identity, right? Yeah. Work dress code, what does that mean? Right? Like, what does that actually mean? Like, what is a dress code for work? Like, you're gonna get the most out of people if they're their most comfortable selves. Yeah. I don't care what you wear to work. You can wear sweatpants and a hoodie. If you getting your work done, you're getting your work done, right? And I think about identity in that way because we have wrapped our identities in so many things that are like of the inanimate. And I think about when you have families, you know, who have issues with queer kids, it's because their identity is wrapped in things that don't have anything to do with this child, wrapped in beliefs that don't make or break your day. You know what I mean? It's like, I got to go to Colorado, this little city called Ouray. It's a population of 998 people. And I was the only black person in the room. And it was a book signing, and 132 people in this city showed up. And I sold out of every book. But I could tell that was the first time for many of them that they had ever saw a queer person. Like, you could tell that was their, especially a black queer person who was tattooed and everything. And so just looking at their faces and how it was like, I was like, you know, like you look at an elephant at the zoo type of tea, like, wow, like this, like, oh God, like, and I was like, listen.
Like a rare.
And so I just started off, I was like, listen, most of y'all probably watch a particular news network that tells you to be scared of me. And so I said, are y'all scared of me? And you know, some of them laugh, some of them chuckle. I said, no, but seriously, y'all have all probably watched this news, because I was like, we're in this small little red county in Colorado, so I know what y'all watch. They told you to be afraid of trans people. They told you not to let me use your bathroom. They told you to not let me do this, do that. Do you see? I was like, it's not that. Yeah. Now y'all all can go out and say you know a non-binary person. You know what I mean? And so I think that's part of the work when it comes to families and things. Sometimes they don't even know what they're fighting against. Yeah. They're just fighting it because stuff has just been pumped in these people's head for so many years that then when the thing comes face to face with them, they're like, I'm so afraid of this because you're gonna do this and be like that. And it's like, where did you get that? Yeah. And so I think that's where it starts. I think the visibility to representation helps, but it's with people having to actually interrogate themselves first before then doing the work of creating a relationship that they need to have in the space that they have with their queer children.
I love that. Taking a look at yourself, I think, is definitely the place to start. And I obviously cannot talk about family without talking about your grandmother, your nanny, and her influence. Also, like, speaking of family, reading the book, like, her love was just so healing. I really believe that. I love the individual attention she gave to each of her grandchildren, and reading it, I felt like she, coming from a Mexican family, I felt like she was like the glue of your family. At least that is how I read it, and she just seems so impactful. So I have to know, like, what was the impact on her life, and are there characteristics from her that you still continue to have today?
Yeah, I mean, she had a huge impact on my life. She had a profound impact on, I think, all of our lives. She was a black woman from the South, from Spartanburg, South Carolina. She originally was one of 10 kids, and she lost her 3 youngest siblings in a house fire. And so she then became the baby of the family. She lost they were four, 3, and 1, the siblings that she lost, and she was the last one that was saved out the house. And so she essentially had just been like a fighter her whole life, and she became the matriarch of the family, even though she was the baby. And I don't know, she just had a very unique view of the world and how the world should work. And she was, the head of the missionaries and the head of the flower club and the mother of the church and all of those things, but she still just didn't take the Bible as law. Yeah. Like, it wasn't law to her. It was teachings, it was words to live by, but also words that could be interpreted for situations, and it didn't mean that those words were like finite and correct. It was like, listen, this is what the lesson is that came from this. So just know, going down this path, this lesson may be the lesson that helps you, but I don't think this is necessarily a good or a bad thing, And I think that's how she viewed queer and trans people. I grew up with a transgender cousin named Hope. And, when it came to that, I wouldn't, and I write it in the book, she didn't necessarily struggle with it, but it was just a lot for her to process. Because she's like, I'm an older Black lady. You got to give me a minute with all of this. This is a lot.
I think that was one of my favorite lines about her.
It's like, you changing your name, what is going on? This is a lot for me to take. It was like, okay, I could do the hair and the nails, but now you want to change your name? I don't know. This is too much. But also she understood it, right? And Hope was at every birthday party. Hope was at every baby shower. Hope was at every cookout. Hope, and honestly, I didn't know that trans people were an issue until the real world started telling me that my cousin was an issue, because she was never an issue in my family. And so that was very interesting for me, because my grandmother had created such a safe space for people like us that we always had home. It was, how do we survive what's outside of the house? Yeah. And that's always so interesting to me, because so many people are trying to survive the world in their homes. And even when you have a safe space at home, sometimes it's still not enough. Which is why then you have to then fight society to fight for better change, so that there could be safe spaces in society as well as safe spaces at home. And that's just what she was. She was like a protector, a provider, super, super intelligent when it just came to life. She was experienced in life. She had a PhD in life. And I think we sometimes discount people's life experience for academia. And it's she never graduated high school, because she had my mother when she was 16 and she had to go to work. This was in the 50s. And she had to work. And she still became a registered nurse and still got her certifications and did all of these other things without having a full high school education, as they would say. And that's just, I don't know, I guess I kind of just take a lot of that with me. And honestly, I think the main thing I take from her is sharing life experiences and understanding that, yeah, I have a master's degree and I have a bachelor's degree, but none of that really is what made this book the book or makes me an author, right? Because none of my degrees are in writing. So, but my writing is in life experience. And so having a woman who was so full of life and so full of experiences, I think that's what pushed me to want to tell stories. And because she was a good storyteller. She wasn't as good a storyteller as my Aunt Margaret, which was her sister, but Aunt Margaret was the best storyteller. But I came from Black women who were storytellers. They were oral tradition tellers, right? They didn't write everything down, but they kept telling us the stories so that we could write them down. And so I think essentially I got to then write the stories down where many of these instances and these things came from them and came from Nanny.
I love that. I think also one of my favorite stories that you shared from her, not only the barbecues with Hope, was when y'all were buying shoes to go to Disneyland or Disney World or something, and she bought you cowboy boots.
I asked for cowboy boots.
I asked for cowboy boots. But on top of that, I was also thinking, that seems like such a terrible foot choice for Disney.
I don't know. I guess at the time it was and mind you, I think I left my boots in New York this morning. because I came from New York. It's all right. I mean, they were my lower boots. I had a high heel stiletto boot on last night. I have those in my bag. I can't find my cowboy boots though, because I was gonna wear them tonight, and I was like, I don't have them. Like, where are they? I think I left them in a hotel room. But the story she's talking about, basically, my grandmother, one of her things she was adamant about was that as young black kids that we traveled. She always felt that one of the things that was like harmful to black community was that you had a lot of black kids who never left their city or never left their state, and like rarely got to see world. And so she would take us on vacation every year to like different places, whether it was Georgia or we would go to South Carolina, we would go to Virginia. This particular trip, we went to California. And it was like the first time many of us were on a plane and all of those things. And we were going to Disneyland. And so she was like, everybody could get new sneakers. And so my cousins, at the time, cross-colored sneakers were like the thing. If y'all remember the rap group Crisscross, it was a whole big thing. And everybody had to have a pair of cross colors. And so all my cousins got them, and I looked at her and I was like, I don't want these sneakers. And so she was like, well, what do you want? I was like, I want cowboy boots. And my cousins were like, here we go again. Because I was strange. Like, I was this little effeminate queer boy, and my cousins were like so rough and so tough. And they would, like, every time I would do something odd, they would just be like, oh, like you're so hard to deal with. Like, I used to have my ice cream warmed up. I was strange. Like, it's in there. Nanny would, like, she would make everybody ice cream sundae, and then she would warm mine up, and they would look at me like, God, Matt, and they called me Matt. Like, Matt is so weird. Like, but I wanted cowboy boots, and they were adamant. Like, no, like, this is too far. Like, please get the sneakers. We're all gonna match. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be cool. And I was looking at her like, I want cowboy boots, and she was like, Matt could get cowboy boots, and they were like so mad, and I was happy. We went to the little cowboy store, and it was a very tall white man with a cowboy hat on, and all of us black kids walking in this cowboy store, and he just was looking like, what are y'all looking for? And she was like, my grandson want cowboy boots, and I got my cowboy boots. And so when we went to Disney World, we all had the same shirts, same shorts, but they had on cross-color sneakers, and I had on black cowboy boots with a silver tip that did not match the outfit, but I was happy. And so, yeah, so I've always been different. And my cousins, like, they talk about it. They were like, you were always cool. Like, we always loved you, and, like, you were always fun, but you were always so strange. And yeah.
No, that's amazing. It's also really great to get like some more insight into that story. You can definitely tell like your cousins, even throughout, like they always had your back, no matter what happened, and it's told throughout the story as well. And I love that you, through this book, showed and told powerful stories and were authentic, and you can definitely feel that in your writing. And of course, with coming to share meaningful stories comes a lot of like book bans and challenges, unfortunately. And I know this book, watching a previous interview, you said that when you were going to release this book, you had prepared your team for bans and outlash, and like you knew that this was gonna get some uprising, of course. Yeah. And since it's released, just a little bit of backstory, it has been one of the most top challenged books in America and has appeared on ALA's 10 most banned books in America for the past 3 years, which has been every year since it has been released. And I know that you had that mindset going into it of like, hey, this is going to happen, but that was in 2020. It is 2024, and book bans are at an all-time high. So like the landscape is different. Yeah. So what would you tell yourself back then when getting ready to release this book, knowing what you know now and where you are in your journey as an author?
I mean, oddly enough, I probably would have went even further. I like looking at it now. I'm like, damn, I could have went harder. And it's, I guess what's funny is like the part that I thought I didn't think, like the part that they're banning it over was not what I thought they were going to ban the book over. And I mean, like, it's page 268, 270, and 272. That's the 3 pages. It's those 3 pages that they constantly talk about when Senator Kennedy went to the Senate Judiciary meeting and read the book out loud.
Oh, God.
And, like, the strongest, like, foghorn leghorn type of like accent he could read it in, only to then say like, and kids shouldn't read this. It's like, and you just read it for all of them. Like, it was so weird. But I never thought the book was gonna get banned for that chapter or any of the chapter on like sex and consent and yeah, I just didn't. I always thought, which is also how I know that none of these people have read the book. Because
They usually don't.
I thought they were going to ban it over what I said about Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln. Like, I knew that was going to be like the tipping point for them. Like, you know, in this country, they do not like you talking about the forefathers in any type of light outside. And I did. And like, throughout the book, I called them out. And so I thought that was what was going to be attacked the most. And like, no, we don't want the kids learning about the truth about Abraham Lincoln and the truth about, you know, Thomas Jefferson. So it was funny when no one has been upset about that part. Like, there has not been a single challenge to the book for that part. And so for chapter 5, and I was like, this is so weird. But that's when I learned, like, oh, they haven't read it. Like, because you don't even get to the sexual parts in the 200 pages. Like, what I said about Thomas Jefferson being a rapist came way before that. So they didn't even get to that part. So yeah, I probably would have went harder. Like, I think I probably would have put more in it. And also part of it was this book is not like any other book. But I didn't know that before I wrote it. Like, it was after it came out and we were trying to find comparison titles and things that I realized, like, there aren't many memoirs that blend history in the way that I did it. And so part of the struggle was there were more historical elements in the book, but they were like, it's supposed to be a memoir. Like, we don't want it to go so far that it's an essay collection, because essay collections get classified different than memoirs get classified. So it was like a lot of that type of stuff happening too. But now, you know, everything is out. I probably would have kept some more of the historical, me trying to correct the revisionist histories that I had in the book originally. So I would have probably added that stuff back in.
That's really interesting. And I know when you put out this book, you wrote this book to provide representation to youth and share your story so people can relate to your story. And so one of my last questions for tonight will be, what positives have you seen from sharing your story from those you've shared it with?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen kids become activated. I've seen young adults, like, really, really become inspired to tell their own stories. I've seen how this book has transitioned from one media format into art classes, where you have art students recreating the cover in like a myriad of different ways for like their final art projects. I've been several thesis paper finals for people in like college and in grad school, and they've reached out for like interview or, you know, sent me like, hey, I defended my master's thesis today and like you were one of the main subjects of it. So I've seen that happen. But I've also just seen a lot of people be healed. Like, a lot of people feel seen for the first time, especially because I think my experience in going to Colorado changed a lot for me, because you don't know what you never get to see. Yeah. And so for a person who's a Black queer kid that's living in a territory or a city where there are no, not only are there no other Black queer kids, but there may just not be any queer kids. The book is the only thing they have. And so I've seen where the sales of this book are in very, very small rural places throughout the U.S. where I would have never thought people who needed it existed there. Because my lens has always been big city. I've always lived in Newark or New York City or Richmond or LA or DC, where it was always people who looked like me around me. And so to know that the book is getting to the places that it needs to get to for people who have never felt seen in a book has been like the greatest thing for me. And to end, I would say, like, my most favorite session that I had was with a group of queer people who were all over the age of 60. It was 33 of them. And it was bittersweet because like to hear them say this was the first time they had felt like fully seen in a book was a little bit sad, that it took this long. But then it was kind of like, I was happy that they still were alive to get seen in a book. And, and like to hear them sharing their stories of being, growing up in the 60s and the 70s and wanting to jump rope as little boys, right? Like that was like a common thread. And I think more boys probably do want to jump rope, but they think only girls do. But jump roping is fun. I double dutch.
Yeah, you know.
But I think the book is helping with that. And I think hopefully we will see more boys jump roping and more boys in gymnastics and more boys in things that people think are deemed too effeminate, right? Because it's like those type of sports, those type of things shouldn't determine your identity when realistically those type of things are things that just contribute to your happiness. And I hope that more people get to be able to do the things that make them happy. And the book, I think, is helping people get to that.
Yeah, I agree. All right, yeah, thank you so much. I think we're going to turn it over for a Q&A from the audience. We have a microphone here if you guys want to line up. Thank you so
Testing.
much.
All right,
Bye-bye.
it's on. So feel free to line up down the middle here if you have a question.
Quick question. Around your advocacy, I'm a huge fan and follower of what you do. And I am interested in hearing you talk about beauty and the role that beauty plays in your activism, from the book cover, from everything you do, I find beautiful. So I would be interested to hear how that's important to you, why it's important to you, and thank you.
Thank you. I've never been asked that. So I always love when I come somewhere and I finally get a question that isn't like, why'd you write All Boys Aren't Blue? Because I'm like, well, I've answered it 400 times, but I'll answer it again for you. So I come from it from a couple different angles. One, authors in this country used to get a lot of respect, and something changed. And now people with podcasts and basements have become the source of information. And now, and before they'll call Toni Morrison or James Baldwin to come on TV to break down what's happening in the world, they will call someone from Hot 97 or from The Breakfast Club, a TV show or a podcast show, to come and talk about issues, right? And so part of what I wanted to do was do things that weren't traditional to authors. And part of that is my fashion. Anybody who follows me on Instagram, I love fashion, and I show up. Like I'm part of a federal lawsuit in Florida. And so I went to the courthouse in a long yellow trench coat with a 5-inch stiletto boot on, and in Florida, in Trump country, and like to face literally the people who were banning my book, and they couldn't believe it. Like that, I showed up like that, but two, it's like, yes, like I feel like beauty and like with my covers and with all of those things, I think it's all important. And I know we say you can't judge a book by its cover, but I wanted people to see the cover and be seen, feel inspired, feel pretty. I think that, like, desirability politics is a thing in this country, and we don't talk about it enough, how, like, the politics of desirability are based on how's your hair, how's your skin, how's your teeth, how's your this, how's your that. And for me, I'm not as wrapped up in, like, the politics of it as much as this, like, I just want to showcase what I feel is beautiful and what I think beauty can look like from all angles. And I find a lot of things beautiful. And so part of it is, like, the way that I write is kind of whimsical at times. And that scares people because they're like, well, whimsical writing in a memoir doesn't make sense. It made sense to me. So that's why I wrote it like that. And this cover, like, I chose the cover. I picked this cover. I fought for this cover. I told them, and I didn't know that authors usually don't choose their covers. I told them exactly what this cover was gonna look like.
Is
And I got
that you
it.
on the cover?
And I got it. And so, yeah, but I do think, like, even like from the cover, it inspired people. And so I think with me, it's like I want people to feel their best selves. And so if I can be an expression of my best self, I think sometimes it inspires people to be like, you know what, I am going to put on a skinny jean today. Or you know what, if George could do this and throw on an eyelash or throw on some mascara, maybe I'll throw some mascara on today too, you know? I think we should do what makes us happy, and part of like the beauty of all of this is like I do things that make me happy, and I think in essence it inspires people to do the same. Thank you.
Hi. My biracial dual citizen son is working on his second novel, Color Theory, on racism. Basically, if your book tour is taking you to Denver, I want to know where. I'll tell him. He'd love to be.
I'll be in Denver for the next book. I just don't know what day yet, but
You'll be in Denver.
I will be going to Denver.
Okay. And tell me a bit about the cover. That the guy on the cover looks like you without a beard, for example. Is that you?
It is. Yes.
Okay. Tell me more about the meaning of the cover.
Sure. The cover. So yes, one, we took my beard off. We took because my tattoos do come up high enough. Because the book is young adult, they were like, we got to age you down. And so I was like, all right, I'll go with it, because I had a beard at the time. And so Charlie Palmer, the great artist, is who actually illustrated the cover and who illustrated the new book. So for me, yes, it is me. I actually took the picture with a side profile in the Macmillan office, and we sent him the photo of my face so that he could do the likeness rendering. And then when it came to like the back of the cover, if you notice, it's like the blue as it gets to the bottom starts to fade into pink. And that was something that was very intentional for me. The flower crown is also chosen by me. So the yellow rose is my fraternity's flower. So that's the flower of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. The bird of paradise in the front is my mother's favorite flower, and she's super important to me, and I probably have some text messages from her because I forgot to text her that I got here. So I'm pretty sure she has text like, where are you at? And then the middle flower is the poinsettia, which is my grandmother Nanny's favorite flower, and or one of her favorite flowers. And I just remember during Christmas, the church, like black churches, poinsettias were a big thing for some reason. And she would always have to bring them home. And so she would have a bunch of these, like white and red, because you could get them in two different colors, just around the house during Christmas. And so it always makes me think of her. And I put that one in the middle because she's like the center of my world. And so I put her in the center of the crown. And so, yeah, that was kind of how I put it all together to get the book cover.
And where are some rural areas or counties or whatever where you're surprised the book is selling?
Omaha, Nebraska was very shocking when we saw it was just shocking to see how many sales I had in Nebraska. Like, that was shocking. Iowa's the state that has attacked me the most, even though we just found out the other day, I think my book was only in 10% of their libraries, even though now it's banned in the entire state. And they have there's a felony law, or is it misdemeanor? I think it's a misdemeanor. If an educator gives my book to a teenager, it's a misdemeanor. $2,500 fine, up to a year in jail. And it was built around my book. The law was literally, when Kim Reynolds, their governor, went on TV, she read from All Boys Aren't Blue. It was like, I am enacting this law to keep books like this out of schools. And so, she got it out of their schools, but she hasn't got it out of their state, because I can see where we're selling books. So, so people in Iowa are still buying the book. As I was saying, Colorado, Ouray is a city of 998 people. I probably sold 998 copies in Ouray, because everybody has read the book there. It was a little city called Leadsville that I had went to in Colorado right before that, population of 3,352. It's like way up in the mountains. Yes, and I went there, and 100 and 200 people showed up to my book event there, right? Like this little tiny city, and everybody had the book. So it sells in like places like that you would just never expect.
So you mentioned a lot of the history, and I love how you interweave that history. And you also said that you would push that history further if you would have known. Could you share with us one or two examples of that history that got cut?
Do I talk? I'm like, wait, do I talk about her? I don't think I do. Susan B. Anthony was terrible. like, Susan B. Anthony was not this great, and I just remember when Hillary was running for president and like all these women went up to Susan B. Anthony's grave, putting like these "I voted" stickers on there, and I was like, you do know that this woman also didn't want black women or black men to be able to have the right to vote, and adamantly fought for just her and her people to have the right to vote. Like, she actually was not a great person. I think I would have included more of that in the book. Because she still gets revered in a very, very, very strange way. And I also think I would have probably talked about a little bit more of modern history. And I probably would have read, I know y'all gonna be mad, but it's okay. I'm used to people being mad at me. I would have had to read Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ma'am, listen. There are a lot of things that have caused, like, what the current state of the Supreme Court is. Her refusal to leave when she knew she was getting ill after the president and the vice president, they both sat with her on multiple occasions telling her to leave so that they could get a seat elected before they knew they were possibly going to get out of office. They met with her twice, and she refused to do it. And the current state of the court is partially because of that American essentialism and entitlement that she had with that position. As many great things as she did, I don't think she even could fathom that her refusal to simply just step down and allow someone else to be put in that place has now shifted the country for the next 50 to 100 years. And I think what we also could learn from that is that there is a problem in politics just in general, because this is how I would have written that chapter. It's a problem in politics just in general because they don't believe in passing the damn torch. And so when you end up with politicians who are well into their 80s and their 90s still, and then these politicians pass and there's literally no backup. Like, they had no replacement plan. They had nobody waiting in the wings to learn the systems, to learn the government, to be ready to take the reins. And then they don't trust Gen Z. So it's like you just end up in where we are today with, I don't know what's going to happen November 5th, but it's probably going to be funny. I kind of got to look at it as a comedy at this point, like a dark comedy. But America's in this dark comedy era. And so that's what I would have talked about a little bit more. Like, if we're gonna actually like progress as a country, we have to start passing the torch. And we have to start passing the torch to those who are around like the age demographics of the majority of the country today, rather than where we are right now with the situation. But I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg is kind of like a symbol of what happens when we don't put that plan in place.
All right, thanks for coming out. I just wanted to ask about, because I know we've been talking a lot about your books getting banned, and just how can people support that fight against banned books? Like, what are some actual items that we can do?
Thank you. Fighting against banned books. I'm like, I'm grateful that I have a new book coming out, so I don't have to, talk as much about book bans. I could shift a little bit and talk about, like, I write new things too, but then they're gonna ban that one too. So I'm like, well, damn, I'm probably gonna be just kind of like in a new cycle of book bans. But how people can really help is, one, when you read the book, like sharing stories about like what the book actually is about. versus what they continue to put out that the books are about. Because most people who have read the 3 pages that they put out think my entire book is about sex. Like, they think the entire book is about it. And so I've even seen what has happened. There were some women who used to be part of the Moms for Liberty. I'm very big on calling out the actual names of groups. You know, people be like, yeah, the Karens. It's like, no, what's that lady's actual name? Like, you know, because that lady got an actual name, and I want everybody to know her actual name the same way she want everybody to ban my actual book. So the Moms for Liberty, you know, very interesting organization, which it's funny because I watched the Golden Girls. They really just the Daughters of the Confederacy with a new name. And I was like, the easiest way to beat them is the same way we got rid of them the last time. So, which, yeah, we just got work to do, but it's a plan in place. But people have left the Moms for Liberty because they've actually read the books. And so what happened was they all were like, gung-ho, this book is terrible, this book's terrible. There was this one woman who was a part of Moms for Liberty in Kansas City, and she was like, you know what, I'm gonna actually read the whole book. And she was like, I knew the parts were coming about the sex, but she was like, by the time I got to it, I had already fell in love with your grandmother. And she was like, it didn't even matter as much. But then she was like, but then when I read that what the whole chapter was actually about, she was like, it just had nothing to do with what we have put out here that your book is about. So telling the truth about the book actually is the biggest thing you can do. Sales are important because people are like, you know, well, the controversy shot your book up, you know, to the New York Times bestseller list. And this, I said, yes, but I've lost tens of thousands school and library sales. So the general public can't make up when your book that used to be able to go to 70 or 80 or 90,000 students a year now can go to none. Like, there's just not enough people that are going to generate that type of thing to balance it out. And so it's important that you go to your local school board meetings and fight to keep the books on the shelves, because it helps with the authors who really do need the school and library support, the summer reading lists that all kids get. And it's like, if y'all don't help, like, by saying these books should be on that list, then all the kids are going to have to go back to reading the worst book ever written, Catcher in the Rye. And and I have been on an adamant campaign to get that removed from summer reading. Anything but that. And Little Women is next. But, because, y'all, nobody's relating to The Girls on the Prairie. Good book, but sorry. We don't even hardly have farms anymore in America. Like, what are we talking about? But yeah, that's the second way. The third way is, like I said, buying a book helps because when the book picks up traffic and gets a bigger footprint, then the book can be put in more locations. And so originally, All Boys Are in Blue wasn't in airports, and now it is in airports. And so that becomes another access point for a teen who may not be able to get it here or get it there. If they travel, they can get it at the airport, right? And so it creates more opportunities when the Barnes & Nobles will pick it up, when the Targets pick it up, when the Walmarts pick it up. For a teen who may be blocked from getting it from the library, they then get more touch points or more access points. That's the main thing. But yeah, like, my mother has been to school board meetings. So, and she's kept my book on the shelf. So it's all of our fight. You know, my mom is 60-something years old still doing this work. So it's like, and anytime something pops up in Jersey, her and her two sisters, my Aunt Munch and Aunt Sarah, is in the car and on the way to a school board meeting. If I go to school board meetings still, the authors, we virtually send in tapes of school board meetings. Like, y'all, like, that's the biggest thing. And becoming school board officials. Like, it is part of civic engagement. And a lot of us just, when we go to vote, we don't even know who the people on the school board are most times. It just be 5 names, and we just be like, well, check, 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 check. And we don't realize, like, we put tyrants in office that then create this whole thing. But they have been plotting this for, like, the last 25 years to take over the school boards and take over the judiciary and the school boards. That was their main 2 targets. They were not even worried about presidency. And, like, they were like, if we get the lower levels, we could create so much havoc in the country, and that's what they've done. And so now we got to start to remember, like, voting for those judges are important, voting for the school board are important, voting for your mayor, because the mayor is actually what controls what happens in your city. It's not those people. So all of that stuff matters too, and that helps protect books. Thank you.
First, as a queer person over 60, I really connected with that losing my virginity twice section. And as much as people complain, That I connected with that. But here's my question. I'm going to queer Bible study after this, and we all got our scars from church. I want to hear more about theological violence, and are you going to write about it? Just want to hear about it.
Oh, theological violence. It is, I had a saying before that I used to tell everybody when it comes to that. It's like the church operates out of fear, right? And so it's interesting how like theological violence has played a role just in our daily lives. Some of us knowing it because it comes right at us when we have people from the church condemn us and say gay marriage is a problem and this is that. But we don't realize how much it plays a role in even politics and policies and laws, right? Most of the laws that are created are based on religious beliefs. Even though they want us to say that there's a separation of church and state, there really isn't. A lot of what's happening, when you think about Roe v. Wade, that was religious. Those are religious beliefs. It has nothing to do with you. What somebody else is doing with their body has absolutely nothing to do with you. It has zero to do with you. The whole IVF situation, the Southern Baptist Church just shot down voting to say that IVF should be a thing. That has nothing to do with them. That literally, you don't have anything to do with people who are choosing to have kids through IVF. But you have now made a statement as a religion which will affect laws in the country. And so that's how theological violence plays out. And then it plays out in our mental fortitude and in our psyche. The way we used to vote or how people vote in this country has become lesser of two evils. That's religion, right? That's fear-mongering, right? If you don't go vote and this person gets in, where did that first start? If you don't do this thing, God is gonna spite. It's the exact same. And for some reason, people think that it still works. But as people continue to make mass exodus from the church, that's why you're seeing a mass disengagement from politics. Because they're both so tied together now that people are starting to finally wake up to realize that the things that are happening are still being very church-based and coming from the few. Because if you just look at church in general, religions in general, most people do not attend church anymore. They don't. And I forgot who said it. It was either Martin Luther King or Malcolm X who said, like, the most racist moment in America is 12 o'clock noon on Sunday. Like, because that was the most divided that you ever would see the country, because everybody went to their religions, and it was you were at a black church, and you went to a white church, and you went to a Catholic church, and you went to a Muslim church, and you went here, and that was the most divided, was Sundays in America was your most divided. But now, all of that has shifted, even though the mentality is still laws based on religion. And I think that's how the violence continues to show up. Is back then it made sense because people's religious beliefs were so strong. But then once the morality of the world started to go bankrupt, so did the spiritual. And so now when you have these elected officials who have zero morals, you can't really, but they claim to be Christians. The two can't match anymore, right? And these people used to do this covertly, so you could have some semblance of belief that these people believed in Christianity. But now it's like, wait a minute, you claim you're a Christian and you do all of this? Like, all this mess? You a felon? You over here doing, like you a whole felon, and you got the backing of the evangelical church, and you a whole felon, and they've been putting black people in jail for years on the smallest things and raising their fists in the air saying felons need to go to jail. And then the first time it happened on your side, now all of a sudden it's like, but not that felon. So it's like we lose the belief in the God, right? Or in the word in the church and in the Bible. And so I think that's how the violence has played out. And so that's what I said, November 5th is going to be a comedy show, because the exit polls are just going to be like, I don't know how people gonna vote. It's just, I think all of the percentages are gonna look nuts. And we're gonna, but I think we are at that, we're at the boiling point of, is religion going to continue to dictate the country? And right now it feels like they're starting to lose the momentum as we're watching like the abortion referendums in the states get passed at like 60% and 65%, which also lets you know that there's a huge shift happening in the white woman vote, finally. Call a thing a thing. They have historically voted for their own oppression. I think they have now realized how far these white men are willing to oppress them. And I think now they're like, oh, wait a minute, we actually do have the power to change this because there are more of us in this country than there are any other demographic. So I think it's going to be interesting, but it really still is tied very much to the church, how far people's violence will go through policy.
Thank you.
Final questions, that was it? Okay.
Awesome. I just want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you for being
Thank
here
you.
and sharing more insight and talking about all of these topics. I feel like everyone had really good questions as well. Also, and one of the questions, you mentioned summer reading, and we do have our summer reading logs out there if you guys want to grab one. Summer reading has kicked off, and then I want to shout out to one more page who actually has your book for sale tonight, and then we're going to do an author signing starting now. So thank you guys for being here, and thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, y'all. Thank you.
All right, we're gonna have people line up. Starts right here.